Hello everyone, and I'm Autobot, the Telltale Gamer, bringing latest on Telltale games, Transformers, and more. So welcome back to another review of Transformers EarthSpark, where this time we're going to be covering Season 1, Episode 13, Missed Connection, aka the big Nightshade episode. Now, this episode I was honestly a really big fan of. Not only do we get a big part of Nightshade's character development in this episode, but we also get to meet a brand new character, well, not entirely brand new, but a new character to the EarthSpark continuity in this one, and I think it's just a really fun episode, and I especially love how Nightshade progresses as a character. So we're going to go ahead and see how they develop over the course of it, and see everything this episode did right and what it did wrong. Episode 13 starts out, oddly enough, with this really cute moment where Robbie, Mo, Twitch, Thrash, Hashtag, and Jawbreaker are all basically playing what they call Transformer Tag, where essentially if someone gets tagged, they have to transform into an alt mode, and it just seems like harmless fun until eventually Jawbreaker gets tagged. And this is where I thought the problem was going to come in, where essentially Jawbreaker realizes that he doesn't have an alt mode, so he's not sure he's supposed to turn into. Now, originally I thought this was going to be basically like, oh well, since Jawbreaker's in alt mode, he can't play, and that's going to be like the B plot of this episode, that Jawbreaker doesn't feel like he fits in either. But turns out instead Mo just says that he can just pretend to transform into whatever he wants to, and she like curls into a ball and pretends to be like an ice cream truck to try and get Jawbreaker to cheer up, and that instantly Jawbreaker feel better. And I think that's honestly a great message of showing how even though Jawbreaker doesn't have an alt mode like Twitch, Thrash, and Hashtag do, the fact that Mo and the rest of Robbie still make an effort to include him in their game, I think is such a sweet message. It's a really small scene, but I think is a really good one. However, their game is interrupted when suddenly they notice an explosion come from the barn, where they all run in to see that Nightshade is actually working on a new invention. Now, if you remember back from episode 11, we know that Nightshade is seeming to dabble in sort of an inventor persona, that we saw them build a dugout bed in the B plot of episode 11 with Thrash. So it seems as though Nightshade, being this sort of scientist inventor, is going to be a big part of their character going forward. So Nightshade introduces to everyone this drone that they created called the Smart Trainer 5007, I believe, which looks very similar to the training droids from Star Wars, the ones that Luke used while on the Millennium Falcon, and like all the Jedi training droids as well, basically explaining to everyone that it can be used to both test defensive and offensive capabilities. However, it does go out of hand when it starts shooting at Nightshade, and everyone else so Bumblebee has to end up destroying it. And it's at this point, though, where Nightshade, though, doesn't seem to be bothered by it all, and asks if anyone wants to help them build the next iteration of the Smart Trainer. However, Robbie and the others don't seem interested, instead try to coax Nightshade into coming outside to play with them all, saying that it would be more fun. And I love how Nightshade responds to this with them saying essentially that they do feel that they are still happy. They're happy staying inside the dugout, actually just building stuff, and asks if Robbie, Mo, and the other Terrans want to stay in and help them build the next version of the Smart Trainer instead. I think this is so good for introverted or neurodivergent children, in the way that their hobbies and passions may not be the same as their siblings. I think that's such a good message to show that it's not even that Robbie, Mo, and the others, it's not like they say like, oh no, this is stupid, you shouldn't be doing this. They just say like, okay, well, we're not really into that, but you're more than welcome to join us outside whenever you feel like it. I like that they do respect Nightshade's own passions and don't try to make them feel bad for having their own things. And as someone who, with a lot of my other friends, were maybe out playing game stuff, but I was maybe more into like writing or just playing video games with a few other friends, they sometimes, though, I unfortunately was led to believe that I was in the wrong for wanting these things instead of going out do something that I didn't necessarily like instead. And so I think that's a great message that, unlike I'm sure probably many other kids where maybe they may have been put off by their siblings or friends for having odd passions, Robbie, Mo, and the rest of the others don't actually seem to hate Nightshade or actually make them feel bad for having their passions. They just sort of acknowledge it, but it's not for them, and that whenever they change their mind, they leave it open for them to come out and play with the rest of them. So this leads Nightshade to feeling lost, that they really feel like that no one gets them. So when they ask Dot and Alex for help, Alex suggests finding solidarity in a book series that he was into as a kid. I think it's called The Winged Sentinel, the book series, and it's written by an author named D.E. O'Neill. Now, the author is completely fictional, but a cool thing is this episode was written by May Cat, by the way, who you may recognize has written a lot of episodes back on Transformers Cyberverse. They intentionally named the author of the book Nightshade into D.E. O'Neill after the famous Marvel comic author Denny O'Neill, who is known for creating a lot of the original Transformers names such as Optimus and Megatron. So I think that's a really cool little meta Easter egg for anyone who is a big fan of the Transformers original roots in the Marvel comics. So Nightshade, of course, immediately loves the idea of the book. They read the whole book and absolutely fall in love with it and believe that this D.E. O'Neill author actually really understands them. So they want to go out and try and find where they are. So Nightshade eventually does leave the dugout and asks Hashtag, since she has access to the whole internet, asking if she can help them find out where D.E. O'Neill's living. And so after a short little internet search, Hashtag realizes that she is currently living in the cemetery of all places. And well, it makes it sound like that maybe they do live in a cemetery. Nightshade heads off there immediately, and the results are a little bit macabre, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Now, Nightshade eventually does get to the cemetery looking for D.E. O'Neill when they find this big, crypt that has the same owl-shaped statue that was on the cover of her Winged Sentinel book. However, walking up to a Nightshade realizes that's actually her grave, and the fact that they just immediately just give a soft they don't even seem to react to it at all. They don't even seem sad at it. It is a little bit weird. I thought it would be interesting if Nightshade maybe was a bit disappointed, maybe vented a little bit, feeling that since their favorite author is dead, that there's no one that would really connect with them. But the fact that Nightshade seems to just brush it off and so nonchalantly is a little bit off-putting in my opinion. I get the fact that Nightshade is a newborn Transformer. They don't really understand the concept of death, but clearly they have some inkling as to what death is, considering that they do acknowledge that D.E. O'Neill is dead, even though they or no other characters really say it. Speaking of which, why didn't Hashtag just say, oh, yeah, she's dead and currently in the cemetery? Why'd she just have to say, oh, she's lives in the cemetery? I don't know, but it just seems like a bit awkward in my opinion. Anyway, as Nightshade's about to leave, they come into contact with presumably some human that is wanting them to leave, when they notice that the human actually is glitching to reveal it's some sort of projector or hologram. Nightshade then goes inside D.E. O'Neill's crypt, where they find this huge lab covered in spider webs and find a specific device that seems to be projecting the human, trapped in a bunch of webs. They go around messing with it when, of course, surprise, surprise, none other than Tarantulas shows up. And I absolutely love Tarantulas' design. According to Nick Roche on Twitter, he designed the EarthSpark version of him just as he did with his IDW continuity appearance back in the Wreckers comics. And I can immediately see that Nick Roche clearly took a lot of his designs of Tarantulas from Sins of the Wreckers and Requiem of the Wreckers and took that into Tarantulas' EarthSpark design. I absolutely love that. Another thing to point about is Tarantulas' voice actor. So as I mentioned back in my very first video on this second batch of EarthSpark a few weeks ago, EarthSpark Tarantulas is voiced by Alfie Allen, who is another Game of Thrones alumni alongside Megatron's voice actor, Rory McCann. In Alfie Allen's case, he previously played Theon Greyjoy in Game of Thrones, which is a stark contrast from Tarantulas' character, because unlike Theon, Tarantulas is not a total jerk that I wish unspeakable things would happen to his genitals. So, that just without getting into Game of Thrones spoilers, I'll just leave it at that. But honestly, Alfie Allen does a fantastic job as Tarantulas, having him be this very sympathetic and introverted scientist who seems to loathe other Cybertronians and stay back in his lab working on this hologram project is a really, really cool concept. So Nightshade talks to Tarantulas, asking what he's doing in the crypt, where he explains that he's been in hiding from Ghost ever since the war ended, and he's been struggling to try and create for the past few weeks this human hologram projector, which would allow him to create a perfect human avatar, which would allow him to seamlessly integrate with human society. And I know there's been a lot of Transformer human pretender storylines in the past. You may know them from the Pretender storyline in the G1 cartoon. Even the one girl who tried to seduce Sam back in, I think it was Revenge of the Fallen movie. She was a Decepticon pretending to be a human, and of course in the IW comics, we have the concept of holoforms, where Cybertronians can create human holograms to sort of try and blend in with humans. I just think that's so cool whenever a Transformers continuity introduces holoforms, because it makes me wonder then, oh, what would each of these Transformers then look like as a human? But obviously Tarantulas is struggling with it, and that's when Nightshade comes in, being the scientist that they are. I also love how Nightshade introduces themselves to Tarantulas. The fact that they actually go out of their way to, when they introduce themselves to Nightshade, they actually say, oh, I'm Nightshade, my pronouns are they, them.
I am not a typical Decepticon. I am tarantulas.
Well, my name is Nightshade. My pronouns are they, them.
I know a lot of people are probably gonna be like, oh, here's Hasbro going woke again, putting non-binary people in my Transformers cartoon, you know, the one that literally has the word trans in the title of it. But I just love the fact that Hasbro doubled down on the fact that Nightshade is non-binary, and the fact, even though despite Mo saying it only once in episode 10 that Nightshade is non-binary, saying that their pronouns are they, them, the fact that Nightshade keeps bringing up, it's not just a one and done thing where just everyone just calls Nightshade they, them, and just never acknowledges that fact. The fact that I think they keep acknowledging that and reminding people that Nightshade is in fact non-binary is really, really cool. Nightshade realizes that Tarantulas' human projector thing is made with both Cybertronian technology and human technology, specifically ghosts, like scraps that he has scavenged throughout the years. And because of this, Nightshade realizes that the reason why Tarantulas' projector isn't working is because he keeps looking at it from a Cybertronian's perspective, and he keeps trying to make the Cybertronian technology the more dominant part of the device instead of the humans, and therefore they explain to Nightshade that what he has is a missed connection, hence the name of this episode, which I think is a cool double meaning with this, that not only is it a literal missed connection that causes Tarantulas projector not to work, but also a missed connection in the fact that Nightshade doesn't feel like they really belong with the rest of their siblings, which I think is a really cool, puts a really cool double meaning to this. So with this, Nightshade realizes that they'd be happy to work with Tarantulas to try and fix the projector properly, and we get this really cute and funny work montage with Nightshade and Tarantulas working on the projector. We get this really cheesy, like, 80s synth music of them working on stuff, like even like arguing as they put up a bunch of equations on this little whiteboard that Tarantulas has. I absolutely love how Nightshade acts with Tarantulas in this episode. Z and Fonte, they do a great job of voicing Nightshade, and Alfie Allen's as Tarantulas blends perfectly with them, and I absolutely love the conversations too that Tarantulas and Nightshade have here, where you can really see him over time starting to slowly fall for Nightshade, but not like in like a romantic sense, but also the fact that he really does enjoy having Nightshade's company as a partner or like a assistant per se. And this is really exemplified in this one scene when Nightshade and Tarantulas are working on the projector, and he states how Nightshade will realize who they are once they acquire their alt mode, and bringing up what Nightshade told Twitch, Thrash, and Bumblebee back in episode 11, Nightshade explains that they feel like they don't need an alt mode because they're totally happy with who they are. And so when Tarantulas asks Nightshade who they want to be, they respond by saying that they want to be someone who's both a scientist and a protector, and someone who basically can make the world a better place while also keeping the ones they love safe. And Tarantulas essentially encourages Nightshade to follow that dream by choosing out their alt mode. And at this point, though, that I really love the way Tarantulas explains in like what having an alt mode means to Nightshade. And so where Nightshade believes that it essentially completes a Transformer, Tarantulas says it's the exact opposite, that instead it's meant to not necessarily complete a Transformer, but rather be an extension of who that Transformer really is, like a further expression of themselves. And I absolutely love that Nightshade really seems to take this to heart, that they truly feel like that's a good way of thinking about it, because they tell Tarantulas that they never even thought about having an alt mode as just a way of further expressing who someone truly is, and I absolutely love that. So long story short though, Tarantulas and Nightshade managed to complete his human projector, where he explains once again to Nightshade that he plans to use it to create a human avatar that will allow him to seamlessly blend in with human civilization and therefore no longer have to be on the run, which Nightshade does rebuke to a bit by basically saying that he would technically still be in hiding since he's pretending to be a human and not being his true self as a Transformer, but Tarantulas feels like that he's okay with that as long as he gets to actually be around people. It's at this point where you can really see that Tarantulas does truly now enjoy having Nightshade around, where he even asks them to the point of wanting them to basically run away and leave the crypt with him so that they can both pretend to be humans and live together alone amongst other humans. And while Nightshade seems flattered that he would even ask them to join him in basically being his permanent assistant and helping him with other projects, Nightshade declines him, saying that they still have other obligations that they need to take care of, which I think is a really, really weird way of describing it. I know that they say this just so that there can be conflict later on in this episode, but why couldn't they just tell Tarantulas that, oh, well, I have a family of my own that I am living with, so I can't just abandon them? The fact that they go out of their way to literally say that they have an obligation that they need to fulfill with other people, it just feels like it really, really forces the conflict at the end of this episode, and in my mind, just feels a little too forced in my opinion. So, against Tarantulas' wishes, Nightshade does leave the graveyard, but wishes Tarantulas the best. But unbeknownst to him, though, Tarantulas is following right behind him in his new human projector that Nightshade helped him create. When Nightshade is back at the Malta homestead, they end up going to Dot of all people, asking about how human society can truly forgive a Decepticon or any Transformer in that regard for the actions that they've done, basically specifically mentioning how everyone was able to forgive Megatron after what he did during the war. It's at this point where Dot explains to Nightshade that essentially Decepticons aren't inherently good or bad, and that they can be whoever they want to be depending on what they do with their second chances. And so when Nightshade mentions what would a Decepticon who's on the run and is forced into hiding do, Dot sort of gives an ambiguous answer, basically saying that not everyone uses their second chance well. And so I'm not exactly sure though what the point of this scene is. I know it helps set up what happens with Nightshade and Tarantulas at the end of this episode, but what reason does Nightshade have for asking Dot this now? Do they feel that Tarantulas isn't necessarily a bad Decepticon and maybe feels that the rest of humanity should give him a second chance like they've presumably done with Megatron? Is maybe that what they're trying to do by asking Dot about this? I'm going to assume that's the reason why, but still, just like before, this scene does feel a little awkward in my opinion, and I'm not the biggest fan of how they go about it. Regardless of how this scene turns out, though, it's then nighttime when we realize that Tarantulas was watching Nightshade talk to Dot the entire time in his human avatar. So that night he ends up going to the Malto homestead in his spider form and notices Dot and Alex talking about Nightshade while everyone else is asleep. And it's at this point, literally, the way Tarantulas overhears them talking about them is the worst way possible, where Dot and Alex basically explain that they're worried about Nightshade and maybe they'll have to do something about them. It makes Tarantulas clearly think that maybe they're gonna kill them or something, or do something else to them. So, believing that there's this huge big misunderstanding, Tarantulas ends up kidnapping Alex and Dot, thinking that they're gonna try and hurt Nightshade. So he kidnaps them away just as Robbie, Mo, Twitch Thrash, and everyone else wakes up, and everyone is stressed out wondering like how they're gonna be able to find Tarantulas, but Nightshade is really the only one who knows where he went off to. So he heads off into the cemetery while Bumblebee tries to think of what to do, and that leads us to the final confrontations episode, which is Nightshade versus Tarantulas. Before Nightshade gets to the cemetery, though, we cut to Tarantulas, who is already there with Dot and Alex, having tied them both up in a web in his lab, where we see that he truly believes that Dot is a ghost agent after having read a file on her. And I loved how Tarantulas refers to Alex, where he clearly calls Dot an undercover agent of Ghost, as that is technically what she is, but he calls Alex her lackey, and I absolutely love how Alex has to stand up for himself instead calling him her partner instead. It's just a very, very small moment, but I absolutely love that. I also love, again, just how dependable or self-reliant EarthSpark portrays Dot in this scene, that even though, again, as a disabled person, she's still able to clearly handle herself. She does manage to at least free herself by pulling out a, what looks to be like a hedge trimmer or hedge chainsaw that's stuck in the web with her, and uses that to saw herself and Alex out of the web. Though before they can get out, they do get caught by Tarantulas, though thankfully that's when Nightshade comes in. It's at this point that Tarantulas reveals to Nightshade that to his understanding, he believes that Dot and Alex are holding Nightshade hostage. However, he plans to save them by shooting Dot and Alex with a ghost mind wipe gun that apparently Ghost makes to erase Transformer minds, but he is reverse engineered to make it so it erases human minds as well. So he plans to shoot Dot and Alex with it in the hopes that they'll forget that Nightshade ever existed, so therefore Nightshade and Tarantulas can both go and run off and be free, working and perfectly integrate into human society. But at this point, that Nightshade finally stands up for themselves, explaining that Dot and Alex are their parents and that they don't want him to hurt them, and that leads into a small fight between Nightshade and Tarantulas, where we can clearly see, though, that Tarantulas isn't trying to hurt Nightshade. He's not attacking them with malicious intent. All he does is just tries to restrain them long enough so that he can then erase Dot and Alex's memory of them, which I think is a really nice touch that showed that Tarantulas isn't a bad guy here. This is all just one huge misunderstanding where he believes Dot and Alex are holding Nightshade against their will, which I think is really, really cool. It was really cool how he used it in this fight too, where he eventually tried to just reprogram it essentially so that he was creating copies of himself, and he and Nightshade managed to make it so that it could pick up, like, it could interact with actual physical objects as well. So the fact that Nightshade had 3 spider tarantulas chasing them at all times was really cool, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Despite Nightshade's best efforts, though, Tarantulas does manage to restrain them to the point where he ends up getting Dot and Alex in another web, about to shoot them with the mind wipe gun he has. And out of options, Nightshade is just struggling to think of what to do when they notice the owl-shaped statue that's over D.E. O'Neill's grave, and at this point where Nightshade thinks back to the words of the book that they read in this episode, and finally, we get the big reveal of Nightshade getting their alt mode, and like many people called it, all the way back in December and November, Nightshade does in fact get a sort of owl-based alt mode, which I think fits them perfectly, knowing the context of it, the fact that the owl is literally the mascot of their favorite book series, I think is such a cool alt mode design for Nightshade. I absolutely love how they use it to defeat Tarantulas in this fight. So with their new alt mode, Nightshade manages to overpower Tarantulas effortlessly. I love how they're able to fly around and change the shape of their wings to basically sort of pin Tarantulas down as the fight goes on. And God, I absolutely just love how Nightshade looks in their own mode, especially even when they actually defeat Tarantulas and they transform back into their human form. Even though I've seen a lot of people saying that, oh, when Nightshade transforms back into their bot mode, they don't look like they would turn into an owl at all, which I understand to some degree. Yes, a lot of their alt mode kibble pretty much disappears, but I just so love Nightshade's design as a final design. I mean, I love their protoform design too, don't get me wrong, but their final design is so good as well. Especially the best part of it have to easily be the fact that they have little claws on their hands, even in their bot form, which I absolutely love. I absolutely love when Transformers have claws in their alt mode, like think back to Transformers Prime, Starscream, and Knockout, or IDW Tarn. When Transformer characters have those little tiny claws at the end of their fingers, I absolutely love that. And the fact that Nightshade actually has that to reflect their owl alt mode, I think is so cool. So just as Nightshade manages to defeat Tarantulas, that's when Bumblebee, Twitch, Thrash, and the rest of the Terrans, as well as Robbie and Mo, end up coming as well, when they all realize that Nightshade has finally picked out their own mode and all think they look really cool and all that. And that's when B comes in, seeing Tarantulas, prepared to presumably kill him / leave him in to be like captured so that Ghost can take him in, though Nightshade manages to stop him, fortunately explaining that it was a huge misunderstanding that Tarantulas kidnapped Dot and Alex, and as Dot told them back in the start of halfway through this episode, all Decepticons do deserve a second chance, which he seems to be okay with and lets Tarantulas go. However, before they can all get over the misunderstanding, Hashtag realizes that Ghost agents are closing in based on all the commotion that was caused by Nightshade and Tarantulas' fight, which also, I should mention, in the process, destroyed Tarantulas' projector. The episode essentially ends with Nightshade offering to lead Ghost away from the cemetery to give Nightshade and the rest of the Maltos enough time to escape. And while Nightshade at first seems to be against this because they're scared that Tarantulas will be caught, Tarantulas assures Nightshade that everything will be alright and that they'll meet each other again at some point. And that's where the episode ends, a bit awkwardly, with Tarantulas running off into the woods, leading a ghost helicopter away from Nightshade and everyone else while they all get back to the Malto homestead, with Nightshade now having their new alt mode. mode. And so that was my review of Transformers EarthSpark Season 1, Episode 13, Missed Connection. If I had to rate this episode, I'd probably give it an 8.5 out of 10. I really like this episode. I love how it further establishes Nightshade's character, how they want to be this scientist, and we finally get to see their alt mode as an owl, which I think is totally fitting for them. I absolutely love it. I absolutely love how Tarantulas was portrayed in this episode. Alfie Allen did a great job as him. I really hope we get to see more of him before this season ends, because unfortunately this is the only episode he shows up in this batch, but I think he was a great addition to this cast and acts as a good mentor to Nightshade, where if you think of other characters, we had Wheeljack act as a mentor to Twitch. Thrash doesn't really have a mentor, though. I guess you could argue Bumblebee to a degree has sort of a mentorship with Thrash. Hashtag doesn't really have a mentor either, but now we have Tarantulas as a mentor to Nightshade. I do like how, for the most part, all the Terrans have Cybertronian that they look up to and sort of take like as a parental figure of sorts, with Tarantulas being Nightshade's like father figure, Wheeljack being Twitch's father figure, and so on. And I think that's really, really cool. But there are just a few things that I think drag this episode down, such as the fact that Nightshade's describing the reason why they can't be a Tarantulas is because they have obligations. As the wording just feels so forced and stuff, and the way that the plot thread with all the with the rest of the Maltos sort of just not really bothering to try and get to understand Nightshade's own unique passions, that just sits a little bit wrong with me. I like that they acknowledge it, but then they don't really go anywhere. They just focus on Nightshade's relationship with Tarantulas. It does bother me a little bit, but overall though, it was a good episode. Maybe an 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10 or an 8.5 out of 10. But that's going to be for this review. I'll be back next week with episode 14, Security Protocols, which is easily my favorite episode in this batch, so you do not want to miss that. If you like this review, be sure to like, comment, and of course subscribe, and I will see you guys later.